Welcome to the Global News Podcast. I'm Ankur Desai. On this episode, I'm joined by BBC Monitoring's China analyst, Kerry Allen. Kerry, it is always good to have you on, particularly about a story like this, which is quite interesting. China has introduced something they're calling a unity law, which some people are saying erodes the rights of minorities. So just get into this for us and just explain what the law is and how it affects certain minorities, I guess.
Yeah, of course. So this law's full name is the Ethnic Unity and Progress Promotion Law, and it was passed in March earlier this year during what's known as China's two sessions, which are meetings of China's top legislature and its top advisory body. And they decided that this law needed to happen because they felt that it created a legal foundation for national cohesion within China amongst its different ethnic groups, of which altogether there are 56. The majority in China are known as the Han Chinese, and they account for about 92%. And then 8% of the remainder make up Tibetans, Uyghurs, Kazakhs, Koreans. They make up lots of different demographics.
And in terms of how this has been reported, can you just give us a bit of an understanding as to how the Chinese government have talked about it and promoted it, and what some critics and skeptics have said?
Yeah, so official media have been saying that this actually, as they see it, is an opportunity to promote ethnic culture and language. That they say that it protects different ethnic groups within China. So they see it as a protective mechanism. They've also been saying that it also gives the opportunity to combat terrorism, separatism, religious extremism. So they're saying that it's a way to protect the nation as a whole by bringing them together. But critics from outside of China, we're talking rights groups, but we're also talking overseas, people in Taiwan, for example, they've seen it as a way of China enforcing long arms jurisdiction. So what they see this law as doing is basically deciding what is separatism, what is extremism, and they're saying that this law might be used to target people overseas. I mean, factoring in that China has a lot of tensions with Taiwan at the moment, that it might target Taiwanese and say they're separatists, they violate this law, so we can hold them criminally accountable.
Yeah, there have been some prominent critics of this as well. Well, we've talked about the fact that it can affect Uyghurs, for example, Mongolians, and you mentioned Taiwan there. There's been criticism from there and also further afield abroad. We played on the newsroom program yesterday a clip of Richard Gere, the actor, famous Hollywood actor, who was talking about it and how this affects people abroad. So this is getting quite a bit of coverage, not just in China, but away from China too.
It is, absolutely, yes. There have been government officials in the West who've said that that this could create an environment where people where people who've left China and settled overseas don't feel safe. So they feel that they have to self-censor themselves. If they're seen as dissidents or separatists, that they might be targeted by this law. And so governments are starting to move towards looking at enforcement that they can put in that protects people, overseas Chinese, in the event that this could happen.
And you mentioned dissidents there as well, overseas dissidents. What tactics have China used then to intimidate overseas dissidents in the past?
Well, a lot of people have actually compared this law to a controversial law that was introduced in 2020 in Hong Kong, which was called the National Security Law. A lot of critics of this law have said that what this does is it criminalizes very loose ideas about what is regarded as separatism, and therefore can hold people criminally accountable. So one of the ways that people are thinking this law might be used is to make people feel that they can't speak openly when they're overseas, or make people who've left China feel that they can't speak openly for fear of persecution. There have been tactics of people being pressured online, intimidated on the streets, groups of Chinese, targeting, for example, Hong Kong dissidents who left after the national security law was imposed. So there are considerations at the moment about whether similar tactics might come into place, whether people who are targeted by this law, if if critics are saying, this is how it could be used, that they could be held under arrest, false arrest, or just simply intimidated, told, information spread about them online, smeared online, followed in the streets, basically made to feel unsafe as a whole.
Yeah, because people raise a question about what sort of powers does this give China, especially when you talk about people who are abroad in foreign countries and in foreign territories where there are other laws, obviously, of that own country put in place.
Yeah, this is why Western media have said that this law might give opportunity to what it calls long arms jurisdiction, China extending its reach. And there's a certain irony in this because at the moment, China is trying to send a big message to Western countries about how it can be a unifier, how it can unite other countries, working more closely. As a friend of nations, very much targeting the US and saying that the US has become an enemy of many nations around the world because of tariffs, because of wars in areas like the Middle East. So China wants to be seen as this friend, and a lot of the state media messaging saying that this law is to harmonize ethnic minority groups, to bring them together. At the same time, critics are saying that it might be used to do what China very much accuses the US of, to extend its reach, to persecute and to harass ethnic groups, and to make them feel unsafe, to make them feel that they could go anywhere in the world and they could be followed, they could be held under false arrest, they could be made to feel that they can't go about their lives. So yeah, this is why this law is getting a lot of discussion, both within China and also outside of China. It's the question of how is it going to be enforced? How are people going to be treated, particularly in Taiwan, where separatism makes up so much of the modern day narrative? There's constant criticisms that Taiwan's government are separatists. Are they going to feel that if they go overseas and they do foreign conferences or foreign speeches, that they're not going to feel safe because they might be held accountable under this law, which at the moment the kind of the parameters of it are very vague.
Yeah, it's interesting. You talk about this in terms of how it's trying to, I guess, China polish its image abroad. They've hosted a lot of world leaders. The plan is, I think, for Xi Jinping to go over to the United States as well and go over and meet Donald Trump after he'd hosted him not too long ago. I'm just reading here, the members of the European Parliament have already written warning member states to consider suspending extradition treaties with China if it tried to target European citizens. That's quite interesting, and that's quite a strong step from the European Parliament to announce that.
It's not just in Europe where governments have been talking about this. There was also a bipartisan group of 14 US lawmakers that in the last 24 hours have been urging US Secretary of State Marco Rubio to publicly condemn this law. And they're saying that it codifies the forced assimilation of ethnic minority groups.
What do we make of China trying to expand its reach abroad as well? Because here in London, in the UK, there is this talk, isn't there, of the Chinese super embassy? Is this China trying to show that it's going to have such a wide reach that if they were to try to enforce a law like this or to hold people to account, they will be able to because their presence will very much be in the West as well as in the East?
Well, China is definitely wanting to capitalize on a lot of nations' fraught ties with the US at the moment, and to be seen as this country that leaders turn to when there are problems in the world. So one of the state media messages that's been coming out quite a lot over the last year is how many foreign leaders have actually traveled to Beijing that Xi Jinping has hosted. So China definitely wants to, while countries are critical of Trump's tariffs, but also critical of the wars going on in the Middle East and also in Ukraine, China has wanted to say that it can be this friend to the world. But in terms of why China wants this presence through initiatives like the Belt and Road, for example, why China wants to become more apparent in other nations. The reason for this is because China has a shrinking population, and it does fear that its labour market is going to shrink over time, that there aren't going to be the people to actually look after a very large, growing elderly demographic. So it's more important than ever now that China makes inroads into other countries, forms friendships with other nations, becomes really close so that there's much more free flow between China and other countries. But in order to do that, it also wants to maintain its grip in terms of Communist Party leadership and its own messaging. So China really wants to make sure that that penetrates out to the rest of the world and that the rest of the world agrees with this. But from its own perspective, the reason for this is because it's reliant on being able to keep its labour market going and being able to keep functioning as a strong superpower that it's become seen as.
And just finally, Kerry, in your role in monitoring, you're able to sort of see reaction to stories like this. And I can imagine it would be difficult for people from Mongolian backgrounds, Uyghurs as well, to talk about this and react to this. But have we seen much from their communities in terms of how they feel about this and I guess how they can move forward with their lives and still hold their identity without it being eroded?
It's very hard to see such messaging because they make up, ethnic minorities make up such a small sector of the population, so only about 8%. And what you do have on Chinese social media platforms like Sina Weibo, for example, which is the equivalent of a platform like Facebook, you do get quite commonly a lot of click farms that pump out government messaging. So anything that's critical of the government would be filtered out, wouldn't be seen. And you also do get censors that if they see something as negative, targeting the Communist Party, they will just remove it from social media platforms. So in my monitoring, it's very difficult to see anything other than positive messaging, positive comments on social media saying that they think this law is great for ethnic minorities, that it's fantastic, that it makes them feel more unified with China. At the same time, though, I've also been looking at Hong Kong media today, for example, and Hong Kong has a very independent media environment. So you get very different messaging. You get a much more broad spectrum of messaging than you would from China, which is predominantly state media focused. And Hong Kong media have acknowledged that Tibetan and Uyghur minorities have warned the United Nations that this law could legalize cultural erasure. So there are obviously ethnic minorities that are going out and they're saying we don't agree with this law. But if you're in mainland China and you're looking on social media platforms to see how people feel, the impression that you would get is that there's just universal positivity.
Kerry, as always, thank you so much for your time. You really appreciate it. Kerry Allen there, our BBC Monitoring China analyst. If you want more content like this, check out our Global News podcast. You can subscribe and click on the link below. For now, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you on the next episode.